What if I told you that you could own a tiny home with a full working garage, a real workshop, covered parking, and still spend less than most people spend on a kitchen remodel? Most tiny home builders will tell you a garage is a luxury you have to cut. Today, I'm going to show you exactly how one couple proved them wrong. And stick around, because near the end, I'm going to show you the one design trick that shaved thousands off their framing labor without cutting a single square foot. Before we get into the build, if you're someone who loves smart, honest, no-fluff tiny home content, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications because we post builds like this every single week, and trust me, you do not want to miss what is coming up later in this video. Now let us talk about the problem this build is solving. Anyone who has looked into tiny homes knows the usual trade-offs. You get freedom from a mortgage, you get simplicity, you get lower bills. But you also get told again and again that you have to give things up. No garage, no workshop, no covered parking. Just park your truck in the mud and hope for the best. For a lot of people, especially anyone who works with their hands, who owns tools, who wants a place to tinker on a car or store a motorcycle or run a small business out of their property, that trade-off is a deal breaker. This build proves that trade-off does not have to exist. The home we are looking at today sits at right around 1,100 square feet total. But here is the twist. Only about 540 square feet of that is the actual living space. The rest, close to 560 square feet, is a fully functional attached garage and workshop. And the entire project, land not included, came in under $78,000. That is a real number, not a marketing number, and we're going to break down exactly where that money went. Now, before you get too excited about that number, let us be upfront about how they got there. This was not a fully contracted, hand it over and walk away build. The owners acted as their own general contractors, hired subcontractors for the foundation, electrical, and roofing, and did a significant amount of the finished work themselves, including the siding, interior trim, cabinet installation, and the loft build-out. That owner involvement is a big part of why the price per square foot on this build is so far below what a fully turnkey contracted build typically costs. If you are hiring everything out to a general contractor from start to finish, expect your numbers to land meaningfully higher than what we are about to walk through. But if you are willing to swing a hammer yourself on the finish work, this is a realistic target. Let's start with the layout, because the layout is really what makes this whole concept work. The building is designed as a simple rectangle, and that is intentional. Simple rectangles are the cheapest shape to frame, the cheapest shape to roof, and the cheapest shape to insulate. Every corner you add to a building adds cost, adds complexity, and adds places where water can eventually find its way in. So right from the start, the design philosophy here was keep the shape boring and spend the save money on the parts that actually matter to daily life. The garage sits on one end of the rectangle, and the living space sits on the other end, connected by a single interior door. This matters more than people realize. A lot of tiny home and garage combos put the garage as a separate detached structure, which means you're paying for two separate foundations, two separate roof lines, two separate sets of exterior walls. By keeping everything under one roof line, this building shares a foundation, shares a roof structure, and shares exterior wall costs between the living space and the garage. That single decision alone is estimated to have saved somewhere between $8,000 and $11,000 compared to building the two structures separately. Now let us walk through the garage itself, because this is not some flimsy carport bolted onto the side of a tiny house. This is a real garage, 22 feet deep and 24 feet wide, tall enough to fit a full-size pickup truck or an SUV with roof racks, and tall enough for a car lift if the owner ever wants to add one later. The door is an insulated steel roll-up door, 9 feet wide, which keeps conditioned air in during winter and keeps the space usable as a real workshop year-round, not just a place to park. Inside, the garage was framed with a mezzanine level along the back wall, about 7 feet off the ground, giving extra storage for seasonal items, camping gear, extra building materials, anything that does not need to be accessed every day. Underneath that mezzanine sits a proper workbench with pegboard tool storage, a dedicated 220-volt outlet for larger power tools, and rough and plumbing for a utility sink. The owners specifically wanted the option to eventually run a small woodworking or auto repair side business out of this space. And the electrical and plumbing rough-ins were designed with that in mind from day one, which is a lot cheaper to plan for during construction than to retrofit later. One detail that a lot of budget builds skip, and that this build did not skip, is proper garage insulation and a vapor barrier. A lot of people think of a garage as an outdoor space that just happens to have a roof, so they skip insulation to save money. But an insulated garage means the temperature swing between the garage and the living space is smaller, which means your living space heating and cooling system does not have to fight as hard against a giant uninsulated box sitting right next to it. The garage here was insulated with closed-cell spray foam on the shared wall between the garage and the living space, and standard bat insulation on the remaining garage walls, which struck a balance between cost and performance. Now, let us move into the living space, because this is where the smart budget decisions really shine. At 540 square feet, this is not a cramped shoebox. It is laid out as an open concept kitchen and living area up front, a full bathroom in the middle, and a bedroom in the back, with a sleeping loft above the bathroom and closet area for guests or for storage, depending on the day. The kitchen uses stock cabinets from a big box hardware store rather than custom-built cabinetry, and this alone saved several $1,000s compared to a custom kitchen. The countertops are a budget-friendly laminate that mimics the look of quartz, which holds up well and costs a fraction of natural stone. The appliances are a standard-sized refrigerator, a 2-burner induction cooktop, and a combination convection microwave, rather than a full-sized range, which saves both money and precious square footage while still giving full cooking functionality. The living area uses a fold-down Murphy-style desk that doubles as a dining table, which means the owners did not need to buy separate furniture for a home office and a dining space. This is one of those small decisions that does not show up on a spec sheet, but genuinely changes how livable a small space feels day to day. The bathroom is a compact but full bathroom with a shower, a composting toilet option that the owners chose instead of a traditional septic hookup, and a small vanity. Choosing a composting toilet over a full septic system save an estimated $4,000 to $6,000, depending on local site conditions, since septic systems require excavation, a tank, a leach field, and often a permit process that can take months. For anyone building on raw land without existing sewer access, this is one of the single biggest cost-saving decisions you can make, and it is becoming more and more common even outside of tiny home circles. One important warning here, though: do not assume a composting toilet will fly with your local building department just because it worked for this build. A lot of counties and health departments still require a standard septic or sewer connection for any structure permitted as a primary, permanent dwelling, and only allow composting systems in accessory structures or seasonal cabins. Call your local health department before you design around this, because finding out after the fact can mean an expensive redesign. Heating and cooling is handled by a single ductless mini split system, sized appropriately for the square footage. Because the home is small and well insulated, one unit is enough to heat and cool the entire living space efficiently, which keeps both the upfront equipment cost and the monthly utility bills low. The garage, being a separate thermal zone, is not tied into this system, which keeps the mini split from having to work overtime, conditioning a much larger volume of space that does not need to be kept at the same temperature around the clock. Let us talk about the foundation, because foundation choice is one of the biggest cost levers on any build like this. This home sits on a pier and beam foundation rather than a full poured concrete slab. Pier and beam foundations are significantly cheaper than a full slab, especially on sites with any kind of slope or uneven ground, because you are not moving as much earth and you are not pouring as much concrete. The garage floor itself does have a concrete slab, since a garage really does need a hard, flat, durable surface for vehicles and equipment, but the living space above the pier and beam foundation save thousands compared to extending that same slab onto the entire footprint. There is one code requirement that a lot of first-time builders overlook completely when they attach a garage to living space, and it is not optional in almost any jurisdiction: fire separation. Because a garage is a space where fuel, oil, and combustible materials are stored, Most building codes require a fire-rated wall and door assembly between the garage and any living space. Usually a minimum of 5/8 inch Type X fire-rated drywall on the garage side of the shared wall and a self-closing, fire-rated door for the connecting doorway. This build used exactly that, a fire-rated shared wall and a self-closing solid core door with weather stripping, which is a small added cost, typically a few $100s, but is one of the fastest ways to fail an inspection if you skip it. If you're budgeting a combined garage and tiny home yourself, build this into your plans from the start rather than discovering it during your framing inspection. Let us also talk about curb appeal because a lot of budget builds end up looking budget, and that is not the case here. The exterior uses a mix of board and batten siding on the living space portion and simple corrugated metal panels on the garage portion, both finished in the same dark charcoal color with matching trim. Using two different but complementary siding materials rather than one expensive material across the entire structure, let the owners put their higher-end finish, the board and batten, on the part of the building people actually see and interact with most, the entrance and living area, while using the cheaper, more durable corrugated metal on the garage side where dents, scuffs, and wear from tools and vehicles are inevitable anyway. The result reads as an intentional design choice rather than a cost-cutting measure, and it means the garage siding can take a beating without anyone worrying about matching an expensive material later. On the subject of power, the electrical service for this build was sized with the garage workshop in mind from day one, which is another one of those decisions that is dramatically cheaper to plan for up front than to add later. The home runs on a 200 amp service, which is larger than a lot of tiny homes need on their own, but the extra capacity was specifically allocated for the garage subpanel, the 220-volt workshop outlet, and enough headroom to add an electric vehicle charger down the road without needing to upgrade the service entrance again. Upgrading a service panel after the fact, once walls are closed up and inspections are complete, routinely costs 2 to 3 times what it would have cost to size it correctly from the start. If there is any chance you will want a welder, a car lift, a larger air compressor, or an EV charger in your garage someday, size your service for it now, even if you're not installing that equipment on day one. Storage is another area where this build punches above its weight for the money spent. Beyond the garage mezzanine we already talked about, the living space uses stair storage leading up to the sleeping loft, with every single stair tread doubling as a pull-out drawer. The bedroom uses a platform bed with built-in drawer storage underneath, rather than a bed frame that wastes that space. And the entry area, right where the garage connects to the living space, has a built-in mudroom-style bench with cubbies for shoes and boots, which matters more than people expect when you're walking directly in from a workshop that might have sawdust, grease, or mud on the floor. None of these features are expensive on their own, a few sheets of plywood and some basic hardware, but together they meant the owners did not need to rent off-site storage, which for a lot of tiny homeowners ends up being a hidden monthly cost that quietly erodes the savings of living small in the first place. For anyone thinking about going further off-grid, this particular build stayed connected to the local power grid and a shared well on the property, but the roof was intentionally designed with the correct pitch and orientation and structurally reinforced to accept a future solar array without any additional framing work. That is a detail worth repeating for anyone planning their own build. Even if solar is not in your budget right now, designing your roofline and your structural framing to support panels later, rather than having to reinforce an existing roof after the fact, can save a meaningful amount of money whenever you are ready to make that jump. It is also worth addressing resale value, because that question comes up constantly in the comments on builds like this. A tiny home with an attached functional garage tends to appeal to a wider buyer pool than a tiny home alone, simply because it solves a problem that a huge number of buyers actually have: storage and workshop space, in addition to housing. Appraisers and local agents in the area where this home was built noted that the attached garage, since it was permitted and built to the same code standards as the living space, counted toward the overall property value in a way that a detached shed or carport typically does not. That does not mean a tiny home with a garage will appreciate like a conventional house, but it does mean this particular design choice makes the property meaningfully more marketable than a comparable tiny home without one, if resale is ever a consideration down the road. Now, let's get into the real number that everyone wants to know, the full cost breakdown. Foundation and site work came in at just under $9,000. Framing and roofing for the combined structure came in around $14,000. Exterior finishes, including siding, the garage door, and all exterior doors and windows, came in around $11,000. Insulation across both the garage and living space came in around $3,800. Electrical, including the garage subpanel and all the workshop-specific wiring, came in around $6,500. Plumbing, kept intentionally simple with the composting toilet decision, came in around $3,200. The kitchen, including cabinets, countertops, and appliances, came in around $6,200. Interior finishes, flooring, trim, paint, and the loft structure came in around $7,800. And the mini-split heating and cooling system installed came in around $3,600. Add it all up, and you land right around $77,800, which lines up almost exactly with what the owners reported spending. Compare that to a typical detached garage built separately from a comparable tiny home, and industry estimates for a standalone 22 by 24 garage alone often run in the $25,000 to $35,000 range once you account for its own foundation, roofing, and electrical service. That means the combined build approach in this video likely saves somewhere in the range of $10,000 to $15,000 just from sharing structural elements between the two spaces, on top of all the individual line item savings we just walked through. One more thing worth mentioning before we get to that big reveal I promised you. Zoning and permitting for a combined tiny home and garage structure can be more complicated than either one on its own, especially in areas with strict accessory dwelling unit rules or minimum square footage requirements for a primary residence. The owners of this particular build worked with their local building department early in the process, before finalizing the floor plan, specifically to confirm that a 540 square foot primary living space combined with an attached garage would satisfy local code. In some counties and municipalities, there are minimum square footage requirements for a home to be classified as a permanent residence rather than an accessory structure, and getting that confirmation early saved them from a costly redesign later. If you're considering a build like this, do not skip that step. A quick conversation with your local building department before you finalize plans can save you thousands of dollars and months of delays. Now, here is the reveal I have been promising you. The single biggest budget hack in this entire build was not a material choice or a layout trick. It was the decision to frame the garage and the living space as one continuous roof truss system, built and raised in a single pass, instead of two separate roof structures tied together afterward. Most combined garage and tiny home builds treat the garage as an addition, built after the main structure, which means a second round of scaffolding, a second delivery of trusses, and a second framing crew mobilization. By designing the entire roofline as one continuous truss run from day one, and having the same framing crew complete both sections back to back without breaking down and rebuilding their setup, the owners cut nearly half a day of labor off the framing schedule and avoided paying for a second crew mobilization entirely. At the labor rates in their area, that translated to roughly $3,000 to $4,000 in savings on that $14,000 framing and roofing line item alone, all from a decision made purely on paper before a single truss was ever cut. It is proof that the biggest savings in a build like this do not always come from cheaper materials. Sometimes they come from smarter sequencing, decided before construction even begins. If you're planning a build like this yourself, here is the takeaway. Think about your garage and your living space as one connected system from the very first sketch, not as two separate projects bolted together. Share your foundation type where you can. Share your roof line where you can. Rough in your electrical and plumbing for future flexibility, even if you do not need it on day one. And always talk to your local building department before you finalize your plans. If this build inspired you, or if you're working on something similar and want to see more real numbers from real budget builds, make sure you are subscribed, drop a comment letting us know if you would want a full garage workshop layout breakdown in a future video, and give this one a like so more people can see that a functional garage and a tiny home are not mutually exclusive. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.